Okay, welcome everybody to this session, my second session on the DataDigger. If you're totally new to the DataDigger, then I suggest you follow or you watch the other session first, DataDigger Introduction, because this is digging for experts, so I assume you all know something about the data. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be here or you wouldn't be watching right now. Okay. I'll introduce myself shortly. My name is Tingen. I'm the maintainer of the DataDigger. It's not my own product fully, but I'll come to that. I've been working with Progress since 1993. I started with version 6 on a novel network. I work for Axians in Groningen, the Netherlands, which is part of Vinci, which is a big French company and does all kinds of construction work and IT. A small recap: in 2008 we needed a tool because we started with a new framework, DWP, a fantastic tool, but we wanted to know what was going on under the hood. It saved all its data inside a database, and we just wanted to know what it exactly did. If we change a little thing, what is it doing? So we needed a tool. We wrote all kinds of small programs ourselves, and we started looking for a tool, and I found DataHack, created by Richard Tardivon in 2003, and he used it against a dynamics environment, so he probably had the same questions as we did. Fast forward 24 or even 25, the latest version is 25 versions. You can see all kinds of similarities. If I go back and forth, you see it still resembles a lot of the DataHack, but the code base has been tremendously increased, about 20 times as much. And it has a lot of extra functionality. Okay, what we'll be doing today. So what is in it? I will show you some things about how to access a data dictionary that's very low level, about the query history, the query tester, which was donated by Marius Vieren, some connections, dumping the definitions of the database. We're going to clone a database, and we're going to generate some code from our table, and we're going to dump the code, and as last point I'm going to show you the developer hooks, so you can actually add some code to the DataDigger itself. First, at the side of the DataDigger you see this toolbar, and it has a lot of functions. You can add a second instance of the DataDigger over there. You can add the, you can enter with here the settings. We'll come back to that. You can enter the data dictionary or the data library or the data administration, what is it called, and a lot of other things. Like the previous queries you entered on the database, you might recognize this one from the other session, where we updated the credit limit for all customers in the USA that were below 10,000. Here is the query tester from Marius Vieren. You can, when you start DataDigger, it will collect all your queries and it will show you. So if you start it, you can see what you exactly did. You can also drop in a query from another environment, so you can test it and run it. And finally, the database connections. So you can define a lot of database connections, so you can quickly choose between which database you want to dig into. At the table level, if you do a right click, you can enter the connections, which is a fast way of selecting one of your favorites. You can generate code, we'll come back to that. Unset favorites, I talked about that in my other session. And we can dump and clone the database. Okay, let's take a look how that works. If it works. We have the same database here. Is it readable? I guess it is. If we press right click here, we choose dump definitions, a second window comes, and you can choose whether to dump only this table or the full database. Now, why is this handy? You might want to, if you add one or two fields to the database, it's easy to just dump this table. Just first add the new fields, then dump the table, take it all out. Where is it? Here is it. Just strip all the fields that you didn't enter, and you have your, and so you might have just the delta df for your production environment. If, however, you can also dump the full database, by the way, just the full database, or all connected. It's more of the same. Another option, because a lot of you like to work with a delta df, so make a delta df with the data administration tool. You can just clone the database. It doesn't clone all the data, it just creates an empty database of the currently one that is selected. I'm going to, you can choose where you want it. It will suggest the temp folder because you will probably not really use this database, because you might want to use this just to add some fields or to change a bit of all the fields. It will connect, you see flashing lights of the data tools, and here it is your empty database, and I can show you that because it's fully empty. If I select the tables, there's nothing in it. Okay. Let's disconnect this one because I really don't need it. Disconnect. And here we are in our own database again. Another option you might want to use is when you want to dump the data. And there are several ways to do that. A quick way is when you just want a fast overview, is just to view the selected records and view them as text or HTML, or perhaps dump them to Excel. This might look like this. If you dump it to text, you may notice that it's column-based, so you have one record per column. You see the extents here. You can dump it to HTML as well, or you can dump it to Excel. Might be handy. Now we're getting into some real code. From the table menu, you can choose to add, generate some code. And again, a demo. Let's take the customer table. If you generate code, there are some options. I created some of these. An easy one is, one that I use very often, is to create a temp table include. You open it up. You have a lot of options here because my preferences might not be yours. So you might choose to have only the selected fields or all the fields. You might want to have them in uppercase or lowercase, spaces or tabs. I'm not going into that war, so if you want to choose spaces, you can add labels, and you can use the Hungarian notation with one or perhaps two. A lot of choices. You can create a temp table include. There are others. You can have an assign statement. They all look similar. They have a lot of the same options over there. And if you want to add your own code, you can generate your own code. There is an explanation on how to do that. The easiest way probably is to just copy one of my existing programs, and the fun part is that you give it a certain name. DataDigger will automatically recognize it, and it will add it to your right-click menu. So if you have a generate for something, a class or whatever, I have a delete statement, but you might have some API calling procedure for Vim, for example. You could add that and you just give it a name. It should begin with generate, I guess, and then it will automatically show up here. All right. We can save the data to disk. I already showed you how to quickly view the data, but we can also save the data to disk in a variety of ways. You can have, for example, for GL code or comma separated. And again, where am I? If I have a customer, I select a couple of records and I choose to save this data to disk. There are a lot of options I can choose from. For example, comma separated, it will generate a CSV file. You can dump it to Excel as well. We've seen that before. I already did that. There we have it complete with filtering. So these things might come in handy. A very nice option, at least that's what I think, is to generate for GL code. I use this a lot when I have some configuration things that I want to push to production. I create them in my test environment, and then when I have 2 or 3 configuration records, I just create them in my test environment. I choose to only have the selection, not the total table, and then all the fields, and I dump them. I want to overwrite that. And here you have for GL code that you can use to run in your production. The nice part of this is that you can save this in Git, so you know exactly what you did to update your production environment. Okay, so far, let's dig a little bit into the ini files. If you open up the folder for DataDigger, you will notice that there are some ini files in there. There is a DataDigger ini file, there's always one, which is a generic ini file which holds the generic settings for the DataDigger, like should it check for updates, all kinds of things. There is the help.ini file, there's also one. It will hold the help messages, and typically you don't want to look into that. And then for every user that uses the DataDigger, there is a personal ini file. And that file saves all the settings for that user. DataDigger saves a lot of information on how you use it, and more specific, what you did. It doesn't send it back, but it uses to restore some settings. So position on the screen, the size of the window, the table you last used, all your queries you entered, the filter values you used. All those things are remembered between sessions and they are saved in an ini file. Those ini files, most of the things that are saved can be found in the settings. There is a setting for behavior. You can see a lot of them are going into all these. But one that is interesting, that is the ping back. I already said DataDigger doesn't collect a lot of data. The only thing it does is a ping back as kind of phone home, so I can see how much of you people are using DataDigger. It's totally anonymous. And if you click the statistics button, you can see the same info as I have. So you can see what the current statistics are right now. So we can see visits this week. So today, 140 people have already used the DataDigger. Perhaps you can see at the top what it does. On opening, DataDigger will see if it runs on the latest version, which is this version, and it will see that this is the version I'm checking. And that's just a file on GitHub, which is accessed via a URL shortener. On the backup, there is some interesting, because you can use templates here. You can choose whether or not you want to have a backup of the records on create or update or delete. And you can have some templating here. You can see, I worked there, there are a lot of fields you can use. So you can use that for a folder, and DataDigger will create the folder if it doesn't exist. And perhaps you can see that here it gives an example of how the file will look. You can even enter all those things. So, for example, if you wanted to add the day, you can see that if you look very carefully, you see it's the 10th around there. You can use this to separate, to differentiate between your users. Wim?
Will it create the record if it's not already there?
Yeah, it will. The question was if it will create a folder if it doesn't already exist, and the answer is yes. Let's take a look at the folder structure I have here. The settings are saved, as I said, in the ini files. They're probably at the top here. Here's my ini file. And if you look at other folders, here is a backup folder. By default, it's in the DataDigger itself. And if you look inside, you will recognize the XML files I showed you yesterday. And you can use these to restore some corrections you did on some updates you did on the records. So if you look inside, you can see that the old value here is for credit limit. We updated them to 10,000. If you want to restore this, just grab them, drop them onto the DataDigger, just like that. Finish, and your data is back again. I have to give a small warning. If you're going to update records, it's very easy to update a lot of records, or perhaps even all the records, and then update. But DataDigger wasn't exactly built to do that. Up to a few hundred or perhaps 1,000 records, it's all fine, but it's all done totally dynamically. So it builds a dynamic temp table, and if you do that for a lot of records, it's going to be extremely slow. So typically you don't want to do that. Okay, into the code, the DataDigger hooks. I'll go back to my PowerPoint. Here are the statistics. Just skip them. In the DataDigger folder, if you install it, there is a file called mydatadigger.txt, which is actually a .p, but it's called txt because if you rename this file, correction, you should not rename it. You should copy it and then rename it. If you create a file mydatadigger.p, DataDigger will recognize that when it starts, and it will compile that, and it will use that for hooks inside the DataDigger. Let's open it up. Where is it? Here it is. Oh, by the way, Wim, yesterday you had a question if you drag the XML files onto the DataDigger, will it create a new XML files? The answer is yes.
So you can undo the undo.
You can undo your undo. Nope, I don't want that there. Is this readable for everybody? If you open up this file, okay, I'll open up another one. This might be even better because I already done some work on that. If I use If you open up this file, you will get some information on how to use that. It has a link to a wiki on GitHub that will explain how to use all this. Every procedure inside also has a link to the wiki. The wiki is here, and it will welcome you and it will tell you how you can use all these kinds of functions. Let's take a look at a few of them. A nice one is the procedure DataDigger. This is called whenever you start or close DataDigger. It uses a 1 when it starts and it uses a 0 when it closes. So you can use this to avoid Jim to access the DataDigger. So you can do this. You can check on the name of the user. Another use could be to check on the existence of a file on the file system and then say whether or not it's allowed to do that. Or to check on the database name. So you can use the DataDigger on a testing database or development database, but not on your production database. Otherwise, you can give a message or you can just choose not to do that. Another thing to enhance the, you have a question? Oh, sorry, okay. Another nice one is to set the custom frame color, perhaps to protect yourself from changing things in production. You might want to give a production environment a different color. You can get a list of databases by using a function from DataDigger itself. This one is accessible because the myDataDigger.p is compiled and run persistently, and you also have access to all the functions that DataDigger uses itself. Because it's all open, you can just check whatever you like. Wim?
Can you also set a read-only mode in this myDataDigger, or you have to do that before you start?
I believe you can. The question was, can you set read-only mode? I think you can, but I'm not quite sure. So I could set the color to 14 for yellow for production, or I could use an RGB value. DataDigger will recognize it and create a color, so you don't actually have to use the predefined colors. Or if you want to be fancy, you can just set a random color. And okay, we will see that later. You can also set the title to make some extra clear that you're using a certain environment. You can check on the number of databases. There are some examples in the wiki as well. So you can say, if we are in something that's called production, just add that to the title, or else make a nice poem. Now something more, perhaps more useful, is a thing called custom format. This procedure is called just before the definitions of the table are fetched, and it allows you to change the format that is used in DataDigger. So for example, I have here, if you have a date, I always wanted to show that with 4 digits for the year. If you remember the original sports database, it's a really old one, and if you look at the order table, you will see that by default it has a 2-digit year before the Y2K. It shows them here by default, it shows them here in 4 digits, because that's what DataDigger does. It does all kind of fancy things there. But you could use it to use a different kind of format. For example, for a date or for a decimal to force that to use 2 digits, or to add a minus sign at the back or just at the front, just what you like. In some cases, there are fields that you don't want to see in your data list. For example, if you have record ID or row ID, perhaps a sales, where is my customer? Sometimes I might not be interested in address to, so by default I would like to set it to not show that. I could use that, I could deselect it every time that I choose the customer table, but we can automate that. So in my case, I don't want to see postal code, address to, or sales rep. Might not be too... You could also choose to not show record ID or row ID. This is a setting that is also available from the normal settings page, but you could do it in this way as well. I've been working on a QAD environment, and QAD had a lot of, the implementation I worked on had a lot of extra fields that were used as, to protect the developers from not having to add extra fields so we could abuse those fields. They all started with 2 or 3 underscores, and by default I don't want to see them. Talking about QAD, if you have, Wim?
Can you already exclude all the non-displayable data types?
Yeah, a long car, and if you have, I don't know, what can you have, mem pointers, I don't know. Yeah, blobs, I don't show them. A nice thing if you work with QAD or another environment that has some global fields, some poor man's multi-tenancy, you will often see that all tables have a field or something like that. QAD has that, but there are more. I know that DWP already also has that, but more frameworks might have that. If you work on that, you always want to have the same value for that field. If your company ID, if you're working in a DataDigger and you work your way through some tables, you always want the same company. Now you can do that by using the custom save filter value. It is called whenever you use something in the query, in the filter, sorry. So for example, suppose I want to reuse the customer number. So now I always have to type customer number 10. If I want to see the orders of customer number 10, there it is, I have to retype customer number 10. That becomes annoying, and if you have a company field, you just want to have that field. So I made this to remember the customer number. I save it in a global variable called global domain, which by accident is the same value as is used in QAD. I save it here, and just before the filter is drawn in the DataDigger, this procedure is called, and I say, well, if my field is custom, then the default value is, filter value is global domain, in my case, the customer number. This will cover these uses, but you also have, you can also type it here. You can also say custom is 80 or 10, and you also want to grab that. There is a hook for that, it's called query open, and what we do here is just parse the query. I get it as an input parameter, so I cannot change it, but I can read it. And I parse the query for custom, and when I find it, I save it. Now, there are some more hooks, but I just used a couple of them. As I said, the explanation for all the hooks is a link on the wiki, so you can just double click or copy the value over there. Now let's see how that looks. I'll rename this file DataDigger.p. I will close it. I said I will close it. Here is my shortcut. You will see that the DataDigger is recompiled. Here is my welcome message. Welcome to DataDigger. I hope it's readable. Yeah. And there it is. Roses are red, violets are blue, and so is my DataDigger. In the coming up version, in the development version, you also have the ability to have a small rectangle instead of the whole frame coloring blue. So you can choose to have the frame or just the border of the frame. But that's in the coming up version. You can see my formatting here, which was changed, and we still have the question for the customer number. So if I have customer number 10, here it is. I go to a table, there already is my customer number 10. I can use I say custom is, what have you, 80. Obviously it doesn't work with that one. There's my custom. If I go back to order, now 80 is used here as my customer number. So that makes life a lot easier. Okay, so I'll close it. And it says to me, thanks for digging. See you next time. And that, I hope to see you soon. And it also goes for me. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if there are no questions, I hope you all enjoyed it. Happy digging.
Yeah, thank you.